Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're uncovering something that is honestly kind of mind-blowing about global supremacy. We're going to look at how the entire course of human history, the rise and fall of massive empires, and really the fate of our modern economy, have all fundamentally hinged on controlling just a few incredibly narrow paths in the ocean. Okay, let's just dive right in by challenging a pretty common illusion. When you think of world dominance, what pops into your head? You probably picture vast armies, right? Or maybe stockpiles of atom bombs. But the truth is, true global power isn't actually dictated by those things alone. Instead, the economic pulse of the entire planet and our geopolitical fate are locked behind just 14 tiny lines of water scattered across the globe. Just 14! Geopolitics experts call these choke points. And honestly, that name hits the nail right on the head. These are narrow, highly congested maritime routes that act as the literal lifeblood of the global economy. Think of it like this. If any major power decides to squeeze these metaphorical necks, global trade would just suffocate overnight. We're talking countries facing starvation, gas stations running totally dry, and essential medicines just disappearing from shelves. So let's look at history's narrow battlegrounds where empires are made and broken. Because to really grasp this, you have to see how controlling these specific doors has literally always meant controlling the world. The nations that got to dictate who could pass through these waters, they were the ones who wrote history. Look at the 1490s, with Vasco da Gama navigating the Cape of Good Hope to open up trade with India. Or fast forward to 1914, when the Panama Canal opened and completely shifted global trade overnight. Even in the 1940s, the British Navy fiercely defended the English Channel to stop Hitler from dominating Europe's economy. Maritime dominance has basically always shaped global power. To put things into perspective, let's compare two totally different routes. Before the incredibly fast Panama Canal fueled modern U.S. naval dominance with its genius lock system, ships had to brave the deadly Strait of Magellan. Now, this is an extremely cold, super dangerous route plagued by horrific storms right at the edge of Antarctica. And here's a wild thought. It's actually a route we might be forced to use again if climate change continues to lower the freshwater levels in the Panama Canal. And you know, this history isn't just stuck in the past. Even today, the legacy of these historical conquests lives on. Take the Strait of Gibraltar. It's a tiny gap, just 14 kilometers wide, right between Spain and Morocco. Whoever controls this little sliver of water basically controls half of the trade between Europe and Africa. That's exactly why Britain still maintains a crucial military base right there to this day, just to ensure the Mediterranean doesn't become a closed-off lake, which would literally sever half of Europe from global sea trade. All right, moving on to the modern economic arteries and how these ancient choke points are still squeezing the modern supply chain. It's really all about scale here. Take a look at the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East, nestled right between Iran and Oman. It is a terrifyingly narrow 33 kilometers wide. Yet, even though it's barely a blip on the map, over 30% of the entire world's oil flows right through this single tiny gap. We're talking millions of barrels every single day. That means even a minor military blockade or standoff here instantly spikes gas prices globally. It hits everyday consumers like you and me, right in the wallet. Then, just next door, you've got Bab el-Mandeb. It ominously translates to the Gate of Tears. Situated between Yemen and Djibouti, it got its name from historical piracy and these treacherous waves that used to just destroy ships. And today, well, it remains just as perilous. This is a route leading into the Red Sea that is so incredibly vital that recent geopolitical clashes and attacks by Houthi forces have forced massive cargo ships to take enormous, incredibly costly detours. So, what happens when the Red Sea is threatened like that? Well, ships have to totally abandon the fast, efficient Suez Canal, which is essentially the absolute backbone of east-west trade, and they have to revert all the way back to that historical Cape of Good Hope route around the bottom of Africa. Doing that adds weeks of travel time, massive fuel costs, and forces ships to face really dangerous Indian Ocean waves. And ultimately, who pays for all that extra fuel and time? We do. The cost gets passed directly on to consumers at the checkout counter. And the sheer financial vulnerability of this whole system, it is absolutely staggering. I mean, remember when that massive container ship, the Ever Given, got stuck sideways in the Suez Canal back in March 2021? It was only stuck for 6 days, but it literally vaporized $54 billion from the global economy. Billions. Food, machinery, critical goods, all of it just trapped right there in the middle of the desert. Heading north to Europe, we see another masterclass in geography dictating power. a dynamic that has played out for centuries. Turkey neutrally wields immense geopolitical influence over the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. They act as the sole absolute gatekeeper for the Black Sea. For a nation like Russia, whose other ports are completely frozen for a big chunk of the year, these straits are their only year-round, ice-free access to the world's oceans. And by international law, Turkey actually gets to decide which warships pass through during times of conflict. It's a massive trump card. Now let's shift our focus over to Asia's geopolitical dilemma, the struggle for survival in the East. Get this. A staggering 25% of all global sea trade passes through the Strait of Malacca. The oil and goods that fuel giant economies like China, Japan, and South Korea, they all squeeze right through here. And this geographical lottery has enriched its vigilant watchdog, Singapore, beyond measure. It's turned a tiny island nation into one of the wealthiest countries on Earth, simply because of where it happens to sit on the map. But for China, relying on this one single artery creates a terrifying strategic vulnerability. They actually call it the Malacca Dilemma. History has shown us over and over the danger of relying on a single choke point. The fear here is pretty straightforward. If a major conflict were ever to happen, a naval blockade by the United States at the Strait of Malacca would instantly sever China's energy and trade supply lines. It would suffocate their economy almost overnight. So, how do nations adapt to geographic constraints like that? Well, they make backup plans. China is heavily investing in the Belt and Road Initiative to build overland trade routes as a giant safety net. Meanwhile, nearby Indonesia is preparing its Sunda and Lombok Straits to be the critical backup valves of tomorrow. Sunda is pretty shallow and dotted with underwater volcanoes, but the much deeper Lombok Strait is perfectly positioned to handle the massive oil tankers that just can't easily detour anywhere else. Which brings us to our final section, future flashpoints and frontiers, where the map of tomorrow will be drawn. Looking at all this forces us to ask a pretty heavy question. Where exactly could a global conflict of that scale actually begin? While obviously we hope it never happens, geopolitical analysts frequently point directly to our next door, the Taiwan Strait, right between China and Taiwan. You see, this strait isn't just another shipping lane. It is the launch pad for over 70% of the world's microchips. These are the literal brains inside your car, your smartphone, your laptop. Any disruption here wouldn't just slow down shipping, it would instantly cripple the entire global technology supply chain. But wait, the Taiwan Strait is about way more than just tech. There's a strategic chain of islands that stretches from the Philippines up to Japan, acting as a natural barrier of shallow waters. Controlling Taiwan would theoretically allow the Chinese Navy to bypass this restrictive chain altogether. They'd gain direct, deep-water access to the open Pacific Ocean for their submarines. That is a major strategic advantage that the United States currently works to prevent, which directly echoes those historical struggles for maritime supremacy we talked about earlier. And looking even further ahead, nature itself is literally opening new doors. Global warming is rapidly melting the thick ice up at the Bering Strait, that narrow gap between Alaska and Russia. Now, for centuries, this passage has been completely frozen and basically useless for trade. But as that ice clears, it's getting ready to crown a brand new boss of global trade by creating a much shorter, direct connection between Asia, Europe, and the Americas. It's exactly like how the discovery of the Cape of Good Hope route completely reshaped global power centuries ago. So, as we wrap up this explainer, here is the ultimate reality check. The United States currently maintains a direct or indirect military or diplomatic presence across 10 of these 14 global doors. It proves one absolutely unshakable historical truth. From the ancient empires of the past to the modern superpowers of today, whoever controls these specific, narrow maritime bottlenecks truly controls the world. The real question we have to ask ourselves now is, will a new power rise to claim these doors in the next century?